Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it's Tuesday, January 9th, 2018. The new year has begun, and with a new year comes a new camera, which allows you to see all the individual cat hairs adorning my body as we step into our first mirror matchup, Terran versus Terran. Such excitement can be matched only by sips of water. As we've done with the previous core strategy matchups, what I want to do is spend some time looking at the gist of what's happening in the flow of Terran versus Terran, take an investigation into some of the units in TvT, talk about why they're used, why they're not used, and then step into specific game examples afterwards. And I want to just start off with a slide that I will never tire of. Excuse me. StarCraft is a game about getting more money. If you have the wrong units, but you have more of them, you're going to win every day of the week. And it's also about these strong armies that are very immobile versus these mobile armies that are very weak. And we've talked about that the benefit of the strong immobile forces, that they're good at defending and holding positions and really locking stuff down. Mobile armies are good at choosing when to fight, picking off various weak things. In Terran verse, why the hell? Why? Why would you do this to me? Why would with all the effort that I put into this slide, this thing decide not to show it? Wait, if I just zoom in on it. What the hell is even happening? I did it. I did it. I fixed it using cunning and haberdashery. Okay, listen. Here's the basic flow of the game. In TvT, I want to stress something that I'm going to be stressing the entire hour. This matchup is about the tank in its most extreme form. Like, the entire matchup is defined by the tank. And if we actually come back to that very first slide that I was talking about, that... my God, I'm going to go fucking insane. This is so frustrating. Hold on, let me... Why? Why is it closing? I hate the built-in Windows presentation software. This episode is going to be so good. But God. Okay. When we look at these two specific ideas in Terran versus Terran, the more money, the expansion idea is extremely pronounced. You wind up with tons of bases in Terran versus Terran. And the strong army thing is incredibly pronounced because tanks demolish everything in this matchup. Now, I have learned I need to click this button, go here, click this button, hold control, and then hit this button, and then hit escape, and then open it up like this, and then control scroll it up. This allows me now to talk about the phases of the game. Much like in any early game, the matchup begins by an opening play and you take a second base. You just need to start in all matchups on two bases as quickly as humanly possible. This second phase of the game, this extending onto the map, is really about beginning to move forward and position your tanks. Maybe even using some spider mines to place down in order to take the third base. This is quite different, this extend onto the map and take a third base, from other matchups. If you think about Zerg versus Terran, Zergs tend to set up defenses, like lurkers on ramps to take a third, or they'll harass with Ling Muta in order to take a third. In this game, I have tanks, you have tanks. We're just moving out into the middle of the map and sieging them on up. And that's how we take the third base. This Phase 3, mass expanding and battles for position, is the bulk, the big meat of the matchup. We're even going to see some games where you can lose in the opening, just like we would in any matchup. And there are some times when you can deny thirds, but it's very rare. Really, this matchup is heavily in this spot. And I can't stress that enough, because in Zerg vs. Terran, or Zerg vs. Protoss, or Terran vs. Protoss, when you watch a lot of new players play the game, sometimes all their games are just ended on two bases, or ended on three bases. The instability that exists in those matchups gets just pushed all the way to the game ending on 2 to 3 bases. Terran vs. Terran is the matchup where even new players wind up regularly being on 4, 5, 6 bases. Like, really regularly. Because, again, the tank is so good. And in the late stage of the game, once everyone has the whole map and it's split in half, and tanks are sort of controlling all the spaces. Interestingly enough, this is where the mobile armies begin to show up again. This is where you begin to see things like mass wraith. If tanks are spread across the entire map in a line, you can concentrate the wraiths and start picking off corners, just like any mobile army would. Drops and battle cruisers tend to be late-game transitions. So what I want to do is take a look at just one more list of concepts that we can look at. Is Alt, is Shift. How do I go to the next thing? I hit Escape, click this. Hit Escape, close this. Click this, click this, close this, open this up. Hit this, hit Escape, hit this, hit Escape, move this. I did it. When I say that positional battle, that third phase of Terran versus Terran is really important, we're going to be looking at, in pretty much every game, about of these three core things that are happening in that big bulky middle period in Terran vs. Terran. We're going to look at people setting up tank lines to secure expansions behind them. This is so basic and so common, we're just going to see it nonstop. Second phase, or not second phase, the second element to these positional battles is to try to destroy or pick off isolated weak groups of tanks, sometimes simply by walking up to them and killing them. You have 3 tanks there and I have 8 tanks, so I'll kill those off. Sometimes by dropping on them, sometimes by using vultures and SCVs to just bust in and sort of take those out. Those we're also going to see. Those are very common. This third one is the one that is the most important, but in many ways the most subtle and difficult to understand. That sometimes you'll try to destroy key tank groups that are defending future or current expansions, but you do so inefficiently. I might take 20 tanks to break a location that has 10 tanks at it, and you lose 10 and I lose 15. Ooh, didn't I mess up? Didn't I lose more tanks in that exchange? That's okay if I get control of the position. Because if I can control that position in Terran vs. Terran that has an expansion behind it, I've lost in the short term, but I'll make more money in the long term. So there's a lot of interesting judgment calls that wind up emerging there. So if I do my crazy little moving back and forth between these different slides because this software is really buggy as hell, we're going to be going through these phases in much more detail. But I want to do something that I've done in all of these core strategies, which is to explain why the hell this is the structure of TvT. Why? It's not just that people do this. There's some really important reasons and things that I don't want you to fall into the trap of. I want to start by showing the tank dominating everything, okay? I have 6 tanks. Here's 20 medic marine. Really immediately in the history of StarCraft, people discovered that any bio army gets murdered by tanks. Some of these marines didn't get stimmed. Doesn't even matter, dude. This is not close. All my tanks are still in green health. Also very early on, people realized that tanks that are sieged totally own Vulture Goliath. There's 6 tanks, and here I have 6 Vultures, 6 Goliaths. Vultures deal minimum damage to tanks, only 5 damage per shot because of the way that the damage works on the Vultures. Even the Goliaths was a little bit of target firing. They just get eaten alive. Again, look at this. 6 tanks started, 2 tanks remained. In terms of just raw cash, what is that? That's $900 worth of tanks. And I threw away $900 worth of Vulture Goliath at this force. It's really, really, really hard to go toe-to-toe with tanks. Even, hilariously enough, and perhaps most importantly, sieged tanks even own unsieged tanks. So here they come. I have 3 tanks, which is enough to one-shot an enemy tank. My enemy has walked in range. I've managed to successfully pick off 2 tanks before they even got to fire. And then I picked off the 3rd. Now this tank is out of range, so it cannot actually participate in the fight, but you're starting to see how you don't need that many tanks to just completely secure and own a region. So if I actually come back to this sort of this sort of positional idea, you're starting to see that, like, if you set up tank lines to secure expansions behind them, you don't really need a lot of tanks to do that, right? We're really starting to see the impact of the tank immediately. Now, there's some other questions that you might have, like, well, what about wraiths? Yes, wraiths can be annoying because, believe it or not, tanks shoot up. We've identified a weakness to the tank. Woohoo! Yeah, tanks are better than every factory unit, better than every bio unit, but boy, they can't shoot up. I'm very proud of this video. I have 2 wraiths that are going to kill 1 Goliath, right? All right? Well, no. In fact, 1 Goliath that costs less than 1 wraith easily destroys 2 wraiths. So, it seems kind of dicey to say, I'll use just wraiths to kill off tanks. Wraiths actually cost 150 minerals and 100 gas. Goliaths cost 100 minerals and 50 gas. So if we come back to our previous video and we're like, oh, hey, maybe the key to this matchup is not the tank, it's the wraith. All our enemy needs to do is build the smallest handful of Goliaths to be able to just thwart all these wraiths. So, what are we to do? How are we to break through in these positional battles to be able to succeed? Well, you see in this, we can destroy isolated or weak groups of tanks by using drops, various bust techniques with vultures, and SCVs. So let's take a look at some of those. So if I come over here, this is me going up against 4 tanks. So I have fewer tanks. I have just 3 tanks. He has 4 tanks. But I move forward with my vultures. These tanks will shoot the vultures. And because he's not shooting at my tanks, I not only kill off 4 of his tanks, but I keep 3 of my tanks alive. That's really good news. I begin with this clip by, trying to answer the question how to break through tank lines because it begs a really important question. Hey, is it bad that I lost all those vultures? A lot of times when people think about whether a fight was successful or not, they'll say, oh, he lost 2,000 minerals and 1,000 gas. This guy lost 1,800 minerals and 900 gas. So this guy lost a little bit more. You kind of convert it to raw dollars. The funny thing is that in Terran vs. Terran, you've already seen me present that tanks own everything on the ground. So really, it's about having an overall larger number of tanks. Very often in the game, Terran players are more than happy to lose however many vultures it takes to get ahead in the tank count. So again, I'm losing all these vultures. That's fine, because in the end, I'm getting ahead in the tank count. What are some other techniques? Let me show you a technique that exists that I completely fucking botched, which is awesome. This is using, again, tank vulture, but planting mines right next to the enemy tanks. This is quite hard because the tanks have splash damage. I just don't control this well, actually. Like, blow up my own vultures, man! I did worse in this one than in the previous example, but still, you can kind of see, hey, maybe if I can do some cute stuff with my vultures and get ahead in that tank count, I can do new and better things. What are other clever ways that people bust tank positions? Heard me talk about SCV busts. Here I have an equal number of tanks to my opponent, but I have 4 SCVs. I walk up to be able to siege just barely in range, pick off some of these tanks, and I'm not trying to destroy his entire force, taking a little bit better of a position. Severely damaged, but 4 against 4 turned into 3 against 1. Another very important thing to note is that wraiths that we heard were really not great against a general tank army because just a handful of Goliaths will easily thwart the wraiths. Wraiths are often used to gather vision. So these tanks that I have sieged up, if we rewind to the start, these tanks can't see anything. But tanks shoot farther than they can see in Brood War. So if I use this Wraith to waltz forward, I can often reveal for my tanks where his tanks are, and then just pick them off with the last few shots of the Wraiths. One last way that people can bust positions in this matchup is by having drop ships full of tank Goliath and just dropping on the enemy line. I mess up and don't unload in time, but that's okay. My Terran dropship control is horrible. It's probably my weakest mechanic in the entire game, is just managing dropships in large numbers. Like, I don't, it's impossible. I don't know how you do it. There's my Lemeo, because I completely screwed up that control, but you get the idea. You drop on top of the tanks, so the enemy tanks' splash damage hurts their own friendly tanks. Some of his tanks won't be able to shoot at my stuff because tanks that are sieged have a minimum range, so I can succeed there. But the response that often happens to these types of drops, because they can be so damaging and so punishing, is you just keep a handful of Goliaths with those tanks. Already, a handful of Goliaths thwart small numbers of Wraiths. What if I want to drop with even more dropships here? Well, I mean, not only is my dropship control not good, but Goliaths own dropships, man. So, in short, tanks own the ground, Goliaths own the air for much of the start of the game. So, this is where, these are the big anchors conceptually in terms of the unit-to-unit combat. And I want to stress something, just to make sure no one gets too worried and concerned. We're going to take these concepts about holding positions, and we're actually going to go through a full simple game example, and then we'll do additional examples in the following episode. But we're sort of looking at this stuff in this phase 2 about why tanks are able to go out onto the map and what some of the considerations are. Let's start talking about some of the things that can happen in this mass expanding in battles for positioning in terms of the tactics, the positioning, what's possible, what works and what doesn't. This is a typical looking mid-game. If you look at this mini-map, there is this huge long spread of red units. And I might have a ton of dropships looking for a weak point. So yeah, there's tanks and Goliaths spread out. This is actually a very common look. And it's at a time like this when I might say, oh, you know what? I'm going to try to destroy one of those key tank groups inefficiently. We're still using these same principles that we were just talking about. We're still using dropships on tanks or SCVs to bust tanks, or maybe just picking off isolated ones that don't have enough. But you'll see big battles like this. Again, like, if you want to see better dropship control, watch any Terran player. But in something like this, I drop out of most of the dropships on top of this army, manage to break it. Hey, super happy. Didn't do the best job. Certainly not. See, some of these just didn't unload because I'm awful. But, hey, I managed to break through successfully, and now I can siege up some of my tanks here and hold that positioning. Some of the things that also exist, this is a transition that I do. If I play Terran vs. Terran, I don't go dropship heavy, I go Wraith heavy. Again, we have this common position with lines of tanks and Goliaths, and you can easily see in the mini-map, like, Terran could just own the left side of the map. But if you just build some late-game Wraiths, this is in that very late situation, you might be able to say, oh man, look at this. We have some isolated tanks. We should go pick these off. And, you know, my enemy, Trace, who is kind enough to always help me create these videos. Thank you very much, Trace. Trace responds by sending some Goliaths, but then I might do some scanner sweeps and realize, oh wow, I actually have enough Goliaths, or I have enough Wraiths to defeat these Goliaths. Now remember, Goliaths, dollar for dollar, destroy Wraiths. But I have enough Wraiths to pick off that isolated group of Goliaths, and then I can start getting infinite value from my Wraiths picking off tanks. If your opponent is distracted, they might not unsiege in time. if this is a scripted video where you intend for your opponent to siege right as you're saying, this might happen. But some of the stuff that makes this period of the game really tricky and difficult is you can sometimes make incorrect judgment calls. Like, say I'm this dropship player, I have 6 dropships, and I'm going, gosh, you know what? That's too many Goliaths. I scanned. I don't think I see any weakness here, but you know what? You know what? I actually think that those 6 Goliaths and those 6 tanks, I can take those out. This is where a lot of the difficulty in judgment and control happens. You'll note that I've actually whiffed 2 dropships. They're not unloading right now. Or I whiffed 1 initially and had to reissue. So that didn't go well. I don't know why I edged forward there, but it's really important to be very, very, very careful with these types of judgments of where to bust and what to do. A lot of the mid-game is either using wraiths to try to find isolated things like this, or trying to do big drops like this that can semi-work by dropping like this, maybe breaking positions. Or honestly, just slightly better controlling with some basic busting against some isolated units. This example right here can exist in the mid-game when you have 4 tanks and he has 4 tanks, but often you'll see this all over the map in late game. I have 20 tanks total, but here I have 4 and here you have 4. So keeping these in mind are really, really important. So we spent some time talking about the wraiths. Battle cruisers are often this incredible late game tool. You have tanks sieged up, making it very hard for the enemy tanks to walk up and approach. It's hard to break these tanks because they have Goliaths. Maybe I don't feel like I can get enough dropships. Maybe I tried wraiths and it wasn't working, or there's enough turrets and Goliaths that I can't break through. The ultimate end game unit, when the entire map is split, often is the battle cruiser. A lot of games end, but if you watch very late game TvT, battle cruisers make a pretty damn regular appearance. Slightly less so in the modern era, but still, why are battle cruisers really good? Because the Yamato cannon has incredibly long range, and it one-shots tanks. So, under the protection of these siege tanks, you can do things like wait for periods of time, Yamato all these tanks using good cloning, which you should know if you have watched the hotkey videos. The hotkey and mouse and keyboard trick video. And now my tanks could ostensibly move forward, siege up in a better location, and the tanks and battle cruisers can protect each other very well. Very slow, but again, infinite efficiency. I'm only spending energy to delete dollars from you. Don't get too overexcited by just how good battle cruisers are. Here I have 12 battle cruisers. Battle cruisers can take quite a beating, but they tend to eventually peter out against Goliaths or wraiths. Battle cruisers need to be supported by turrets, need to be supported by tanks. I mean, look at how long they're taking to die. You have the opportunity to retreat from Goliath troops and whatnot. And this is a pretty unusually large number of Goliaths. But I have seen a lot of games where Terrans just misjudge their battle cruisers and send them into a fight and wind up barely losing, and then it takes a long-ass time to rebuild battle cruisers and an even longer-ass time to wait for the Yamato energy to rebuild. Just leave them by the tank. You don't really need to take a lot of risks. I want to just come back to these phases that I have here. Whoops. Come back to these phases. In TvT, there's some opening play, and both players try to take a second base. We know that players will then extend onto the map and take a third base. We've seen a lot of the rules for how tanks, Goliaths, and vultures work, relating to each other, with tanks being the king. This mass expanding and battles for positioning phase might be a little unclear. These are some pretty simple ideas, but there's a lot of complexity to how the positional battles can happen. And last, it transitions into mass wraiths, into drops, into battle cruisers. And as you might imagine, I have some video clips highlighting exactly how this might look. So these two video clips I'm going to show, I accidentally forgot to unmute, so I don't have any audio with them. But there's a phrase that Artosis says a lot, which is that in TvT, almost any opening can work. And we're going to look at two different openings and think about their various considerations. First of all, what threats exist in the early game? I just missed the start of this. And what threats exist in the early game? Well, certainly not Marines, right? Marines are never going to be built in large numbers, and tanks own those. So often barracks are constructed, build 1, maybe 2 Marines, maybe 0, then the barracks just lifts off to go scout. Scouting barracks were really, really common at the start of this matchup. So we see this is a game between the brown player Last up against the yellow player Light. Last, the second best Terran in the world after Flash, and Light, considered one of the best attacking Terran players in history, who will be doing an attacking opening. So there's a little weirdness right at the start of the game. It's a bit easy to lose right from the get-go. Obviously, tanks are great defensively, and you know that a lot of the wrong thing beats a little of the right thing every day of the week. So in this early game period, vultures are oddly a big threat. Vultures are good at overrunning 1 tank or so, or 2 tanks with no support, and then just marching in and killing off all the workers, at which point the game just kind of ends. We'll look at an example of that later. So having a little bit of defense early on against vultures is important. You have to have a little defense against cloaked wraiths, because that's a possibility. You have to have a little defense against just some brunt aggression at the front with like some tanks. So let's take a look at this brown player receiving a lot of aggression at the first, because again, it's do some opening play and take a second base. So what does Last do? Last literally just builds a command center on low ground, right? In other matchups, I mean, you're building bunkers and placing supply depots around, but just goes straight for a command center. Builds vultures following up. Again, just to make sure that he is appropriately defended against vulture. Sending that, again, cross-map SC or a barracks scout, because you don't really need the barracks early on. Marines get owned by everything. Second factory gets produced. There's an add-on on this factory. And I'm just going to say real straight up, what Brown wants to do is get to a point where he's building tanks, man. He wants to build tanks. He wants to get to this phase where he's extending onto the map with tanks or vultures with mind and taking a third base. Is he going to build Goliaths? Only just barely enough to hold off a few wraiths. So basically like 2. And I would also like to direct your eyes. Go away, BattleNet. I'd like to direct your eyes up to this production tab up in the corner. This factory is getting started, but you also see there's an armory in production. So you can see that Last got this incredibly fast expansion on low ground. Boom, super fast expansion. He's building vultures right away to deal with any sort of vulture nonsense. He's going to be building this quick armory to make sure he can deal with any wraith nonsense. But then Last is just going to go get some damn tanks. And I was so happy when I found this replay, because everything gets thrown at Last. All of it. So why did he cancel? Because Light, one of the best attacking players in the world, indeed sends Marine Vulture over right at the start of the game. Kind of annoying, right? So instead of trying to get the tanks, Last just gets Goliaths right away. If he sees a lot of vultures at the start, his opponent's either also expanding or is going wraiths. You can't both build vultures and tanks out of one factory at the same time, so just starts getting the Goliath, getting the Academy, and in just a moment, wraiths are going to show up. Actually, there was a wraith just there. It fired some shots. Academy here is to get scan in case of cloaked wraiths. And the thing that's remarkable to note is that this Terran player, last, Brown, has been attacked at the front. He's had Wraith harassment at this expansion. You can see on the minimap, now that I've activated the vision for both players, there's little yellow blips. Those are cloaked Wraiths that are going to go in and do harassment damage. In many ways, you might convince yourself, if you're Brown, oh my god, I think I might be way behind. Well, not to fear. If you look back in Light's base, Light has a starport, one tank, and has just started his command center. His command center is hardly past a third done. So you can withstand a lot of annoying aggression and still be able to get to this next part where you're building tanks and trying to extend out onto the map. What happens on the flip side of that? Again, we're just looking at a different way to start the game off, to make an opening play and then secure a second base. In this game, we see that the barracks is not lifted. Excuse me, in this point of view from Light, we see the barracks is not lifted. Some Marines are built, in addition to some Vultures, which for some reason are glitching and not showing up on my UI. There we go. In order to get a super fast starport, which will then get a super fast Wraith with cloaking. You don't need the control tower to build Wraiths, but you do need it to research the cloak. So here is that attack that we just saw the other side of. Again, there shouldn't be any volume here. I accidentally forgot to unmute it. But we've already seen that fight, so we see the control tower. Once he has enough money, boom, there goes down the cloaking. And part of the reason why players like to do these Vulture Marine pushes early is just to kind of keep you honest. You automatically win if your opponent's playing too greedy. Similarly, Cloaked Wraiths, just keeping the opponent honest. If he skipped out on getting an armory, you can often get like 9 kills. So 2 Wraiths with Cloak are produced. This is not mass Wraith, because remember, Wraiths in many ways kind of suck. Goliaths just demolish them. But with Cloak, look at how much damage you can do. Here is 1 SCV picked off. Here is a scan, and then Light just runs away from the scan, picks off another SCV, there's another scan. Every one of those scans, Brown would have much preferred to save in order to do scans for positional stuff later. And so again, if you're Brown in this position, you might be getting uncomfortable because you're losing so many workers to these annoying Wraiths that got out completely unscathed. But anytime you delay an expansion in StarCraft, you're putting yourself quite far behind. So in fact, these moves by Light more so evened the game up. And Last and Light now kind of have an even play at each other. So what have we done? We've looked at this phase 1, opening play and the taking of a second base, for 2 players with 2 different kinds of openings. This is a very nice, very effective way to see that you mess around in different ways, but you kind of want to get back to tanks extending out onto the map. Let's take a look at some of that actual extension out onto the map, if I can find it. Where in the hell is it? Ah, here we go. Whoa. Whoa. What is even happening? There we go. Okay. Whew, freaked out. For some reason, my computer is going insane today, man. Okay, so here is that same game, but we've zoomed forward a few minutes in time. If we take a look inside of Light's base, inside of Yellow's base, we see that there's 2 factories with add-ons churning out those tanks. There's 3 factories here producing Vultures. Why Vultures? Well, I mean, we know why Vultures. We know exactly why Vultures. Oh, shit, I see what I did wrong. Where is the damn playlist? Guys, my computer is trying to self-destruct today. It's trying to self-destruct. It's hurting me. It's hurting me very badly. Okay, I can do this. I can select all these. I can drag them in. I can then close this, and then open this up, and I can click on this. Why Vultures? Why would Yellow want to be building Vultures at this point in time? Well, we know that they're both going to be building a lot of tanks, and one of the very first things that we watched was Vultures absorbing tank shots in order for smaller numbers of tanks to break larger numbers of tanks. Lots of Terran players will open up overbuilding vultures at the outset of the game. So the fact that Light is beginning things off by building a lot of vultures in support of these tanks, it's exactly as we would think. And this is this second phase, this growing mid-game, this extending onto the map and the taking of third bases, okay? So as we watch this, what does this look like? Look at how far forward Light is with small amounts of units. Mines are out on the map. There's just 2 tanks sitting here. There's some mines out there. This is what the defense of a third base looks like. By the same token, we see the barracks got killed off. Remember that scouting barracks? It died, but lots of tanks being produced. Upgrades for tanks. Yeah! Rockin' second base. And look at this, lines of tanks just chilling in the middle of the map, man. Awesome. More tanks there. And we see our brown player taking a third at the far north of the map. There's little things that happen at this phase of the game. Some tanks are sieged. Some tanks are sort of like just moving left and right. They're unsieged. If the left gets attacked, they'll run to support and re-siege up. We just saw a scan here, if I rewind just a quick second. As the map begins to get split, having comsats at every single command center is super important because there's the scan. Okay, now last knows there's a third base coming up. Vultures moving out, just planting mines, just trying to roughly be annoying. But just tanks kind of sieging up. This is what this extending out onto the map looks like. Players get contained. They'll do whatever they can to bust, using those techniques that I showed, using vultures to soak, using SCVs to soak, using drops. And sometimes you have these little harassy type maneuvers, like the cloaked wraiths hitting the north and a little vulture drop hitting the backside. This is what makes this mid-game a little bit obnoxious and tricky. You just have to be able to watch the minimap, respond in all these various locations. But humorously enough, in this matchup, if you lose a ton of SCVs while defending your expansions, it's okay. You often are not in a position where you're on 2 base, and then you lose all the workers on 1, so your economy's cut in half. Often it's, you'll have 4 bases, or 3 going on 4. And if you lose a lot of workers mining minerals, stop and think, what do you need in this matchup? Tanks. Tanks mostly cost gas. So if you lose, say, 12 SCVs mining minerals, as long as you're still mining gas and spending 100% of that gas on tanks, you haven't really fallen far behind. You haven't even fallen very much behind in the slightest. Having excess minerals in this matchup, there's nothing really to build that will help you other than command centers. So in this position, these drops dealing damage, it's totally okay. As the mid-game extends, this is a typical Terran versus Terran. And I don't mean like an unusual, weird, like dramatic long game. This is like most games, if players know what they're doing. And it's the kind of thing that can be a little disconcerting at first, especially, I didn't wind up signaling it, but like, look at the time right here. This is 12 minutes. This is 15:30. This is 3 minutes later. 3 minutes later. Okay? 3 minutes later into the game, you see yellow everywhere, man. And it's kind of hard to see in Brood War, but the brown on the minimap is just as spread along the top side. Still factories producing tanks, but now there's some more Goliaths in there. Tanks and mines spread out in the middle. Look at these lines of tanks. And these lines of tanks are doing something very important. Do you know what it is? It's literally on the screen. It's that expansion there, man. That expansion. These tanks are pushed far enough to have expansions behind them. And so often if you try to ask yourself, what's my big long-term strategy? If we look at the mini-map, Brown has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 expansions up here. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 expansions here. If I can control the left and right expansions as yellow, That's 7 bases to your 5. I'll win via atrophy. So moving forward as the game goes on to kind of carve out space is really important. I really encourage you to watch the episode I'm doing right after this. And if you're watching live, it'll be in like 15 minutes. But watch the core strategy examples that we're going to do, because we're going to see lots of carving out lines in the map. So lots of command centers spreading out all across the map. Lines of tanks. And really important question, how do you break through this? How do you break through these deadlocks that can happen at this phase in the game? We're going to see a little bit of posturing of 2 players doing a really good job of this. So first of all, what is this? What is this move about where brown is advancing to the right side of the map? It's the same idea as what's over here on the left side of the map. If brown can move forward enough to secure control of this right expansion, well, now I have 6 base and you have 6 base. So you don't have any sort of economic advantage. Look at that, just sieging up, and there's an expansion behind. Brown is not going to take this immediately. He just wants to have control of the space. And here, light has enough tanks. He has a few over here. There's about 8 tanks there. But light is starting to realize, you know what? I think you may have misallocated your tanks. How does he know this? He just scanned and saw. Oh my gosh, there's only 7 tanks here, and I have like 15. So, watch how light busts this. Unsieges all. Loads up. Leads with these dropships and unloads to absorb the first initial shots. And then light is able to move up and siege. Brown responds by sieging not in the fight, but behind the fight, because he wants to just make that big wall. Hilltop Rhythms in chat says, Moyo. Yeah. Terran vs. Terran is very much so like watching Go. It's about forming big walls and trying to break positions and whatnot. So here we saw an exchange that's fairly typical of the matchup. One player trying to break a location. There's some drama there, but the net gain and loss on either side is pretty negligible. Did yellow kill off a ton of units? Not much more than he lost. Did yellow take more control of space? No, brown still has control of this right expansion. What to do? How does the game develop from here? I said it before. I can't say it enough. This mass expanding and battling for positioning happens for a long time in these games. Here, like starting around 14 or so minutes, these players have just been doing this. When I start this next video clip, I'd like to appreciate that it's 18 minutes into the game, and it's going to continue up to 28 minutes into the game. It's lots of just going back and forth. So if I'm looking at the 18-minute mark, this is where, to the untrained eye, this looks impenetrable, right? Here is light at the right side of the map. Line of tanks unsieged behind, missile turrets around to aid in detection and to thwart other drops. That line of tanks at the left is still there. So you look at this beautiful control of the left expansion. Terrans don't really need lots of minerals in TvT, so those minerals can be spent on command centers, and maybe even more importantly, turrets. Look at all these turrets that are jammed up in the corner to prevent any doom drops there. There's a line of tanks to prevent any invasions. Man, how does brown find a window? Well, he has these 8 dropships. He flies them around. You can see on the minimap, there's scans. There's another scan. And in a brilliant little move, Last finds this little hole here, where there's actually just not a lot of anti-air, and just marches all the way with this doom drop to the far bottom left side of the map. And here, light answers by bringing a considerable amount of tanks back. And this is kind of a nuisance for light. I think light even loses this expansion here. Light didn't bring everything. He still has huge rows of tanks there to make sure that it's still secured. But this overall was a very nice little move. Okay. How does this continue on? Well, a little more time passes. We're at 21 minutes into the same game. We see this nice drop here, and again there's a scan, and look at this position. This is a position that is not necessarily juicy in the way a fresh new expansion would be, but you're just looking for any weakness and any way to get some break in the position. We've seen a lot of the techniques that we talked about at the start of this episode being employed, but we're going to start to see the real importance of breaking positioning as the game goes on. This drop here just sieges up right jammed in the corner. No way to get SCVs thrown in there. Very hard angle to drop in. And look at this, light brown, or excuse me, last, who's brown, just goes, oh my gosh, I broke the position. I'm unsieging this defensive wall here, and I'm going to continue to drop stuff in there. This is light trying to reinforce, trying to send in tanks in the front, maybe to inefficiently break this, but just to regain the position. But with this continued dropping on top, last is just like, great, going to keep bombing in there. Now, this moment where the tanks are there, sieged up, all these factories now have nowhere for these units to get out. Typically in StarCraft, the most important, juicy locations are expansions. You can kill bases and take bases. Oh, glory be, you're going to win a game. But in Terran vs. Terran, if there's a weak position in the main base, yeah, you take that, man, because now Light is kind of pinned in here. Light has lots of units elsewhere on the map, but look at what Brown can now do with this. Just continues to slice in and do these drops down in this bottom side. SCVs try to wrap around the tanks. Not quite enough SCVs. Brown still has a pretty nice wall in there. And at this point in the game, I was like, wow, yeah, Brown wins. This is just a very nicely executed play. How much longer is this video clip? What happens here? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, I remember. So, Brown realizes, hey, that fresh, juicy expansion in the bottom left, maybe that is something that I can now sweep in and drop. Because Yellow had to spend so much energy breaking through. And indeed, yeah, that kind of happened. But here we get to see some of the really cool possibilities of the late game. And before we go into that, I just want to briefly recap what we've been seeing. We watched the two openings. We saw them extend out of the map and to take some third bases. And we've seen large expanding, large battles for positioning using a lot of the techniques at the start of this video. Some of the positions looked really secure and difficult for any player to do anything. But then we saw a break happen in this game. And I mean, this mini-map is weird. Okay, look at this. Terran's main base, a big strip where there's no vision because all the bases died. Some units, tons of turrets on this left base, a natural expansion here. The main base is controlled by Brown. Brown actually looks very sturdy here. Brown just has a big block of brown up at the top side of the map and it pierced through. But you heard me talk about the Wraith transition. As games get really spread out across the map, such as in this spot, this is from Light's point of view, pretty much picking up right where we left off. Again, we're 25 minutes into the game. We're still in this sort of mid-game positional battling. Now dipping into some of these very late-game transitions of Wraiths and whatnot. So Light waits until he feels like he has enough Wraiths, uses Cloak, goes in, picks off all the Goliaths, picks off all these tanks, really significant gain, loses 0 units. These dropships try to sweep in. The Wraiths just shoot down the dropships almost immediately. If you watched the Fantasy versus Flash analysis we did a few months ago, you'll recall how many different dropships were picked off by Wraiths. I mean, Fantasy did a marvelous job of that. And suddenly, within the span of 2 minutes or so, these Wraiths, with the support of these tanks, are starting to really be able to push forward and just annihilate these positions that are being established by Light. All due to being so fast that they can pick off the bottom left, dart up, pick off the drop ships, dart to the right, start chipping into these locations. And now we see tanks and vultures swarming in a weakened position. And we see an attempted mass Wraith transition by last. Look at this. Just tons of Wraiths getting produced. And again, this is another positional break. Brown wants a line, a solid line with all his expansions behind. When that line gets broken, look at how trivially easy it is for yellow, for light to just walk in. Just walks right in. I just hit U, which is the hotkey to speed up the replay. This is a video recording of a replay. I can't do anything here. So, at this point, this is nothing but Wraiths against Goliath tank. All these Wraiths just have to duck out. And you don't really need to watch the end of this game, but it's pretty cool, and I figure I've been showing you one game the entire time. I may as well just cut to the ending. Because Brown loses this top right corner of the map, Light just leaves all his troops up there. Boom, 2 expansions done. This is one of the purest examples of just holding a position is so essential. This position shuts down 2 bases. This is huge. This set of units isn't connected to anything. It can't be reinforced. Yellow's not taking those expansions anytime soon. This is just I'm holding this position to shut down these number of bases. How many bases does Brown have? I guarantee you these expansions here, the main base and the natural expansion, they're broke. It's showing minerals on the mini-map, but they're broke. It's just this rightmost expansion that's mining for Brown. Meanwhile, Yellow has 1, 2, 3 expansions mining. Not that one. That's not one of the ones I counted. This has some minerals, but this main base has a lot. So Brown tried to go for mass Wraiths. And in this position where there's a few disparately spread location, in endgame, Light just outmasses Wraiths. And even though the supplies are quite close, at this point in time, Brown knows that there's going to be essentially no way to secure an additional expansion. And so Brown winds up leaving the game. Leave the game, Brown. Get the hell out of here. There's the GG. Don't restart that. Don't restart the whole game. There we go. So I want to stress that this basic flow... This basic flow starts off with some opening plays, maybe some aggression, maybe just some flat-out expanding to take the second base, goes into moving really far out onto the map with vultures and mines and tanks in order to secure the third base behind, and then there's going to be big carvings out of the map. Tank lines securing expansions behind. And a lot of the techniques that we looked at today were exploring where and how to set up those tank lines, how to break through them, and the importance of sometimes just hurling units at locations, because if you break through them, my god, you're going to get infinite value by just denying an expansion forever. What I want to do now is take a brief break, because I'm going to refill on water, because I've been talking for a long time. I'm going to open up StarCraft, and we're going to look at a small handful of Terran vs. Terran games as examples, so you can see in an unbroken way the way that the early, mid, and late game flow into each other. So let's just take a break, which I believe is going to work excellently. Boom. And I'll be right back with more TvT.